So I'm very pleased to introduce some of our guest speakers and invited speakers. So on this slideshow here, we've got the folks that are going to present some really good technical updates and research. So our first speaker is Dr. Katri Hämänen from the Agriculture and Forestry, so the Natural Resources Institute in Finland. So Katri is a senior scientist there, and she has 15 years experience in tree seed and seedling research, and is currently the manager of a research seed laboratory at Luke. So her ongoing projects focus on diversifying species selection in Nordic and European silviculture. And Dave Colatello will present after that. So Dave, longtime tree seed expert, has been working for the Provincial Tree Seed Center for the past 30 years, doing research and extension. He assists with tree seed problem solving, operational efficiencies, and knowledge exchange. He's got a background from University of New Brunswick and University of British Columbia. And he also serves with Donnie, Brian Barber, and I, and a few other folks across the country with the Canadian Forestry Association. And Dave is the chair of the Tree Seed Working Group. And Brian will follow after that. So Brian is with Select Seed Company in British Columbia. He's got his bachelor's from UBC and a master's from Royal Roads University. So he'll explain more about the Forest Genetics Council and what Select Seed does to produce seed for BC. Brian's also served as the Forest Genetics Council Program Manager and is a pretty active member within the Association of BC Professionals and within the CIF. So Dr. Sean Thomas is going to present after the break. So if we just actually skip to the next slide, it'll be Katri, Dave, Brian, and then Felix Crescent is an agronomist from Harnois Industries. So he's one of our sponsors on this slide. So Felix will present right before our break. So I'll let Katri take over now. And again, please put your questions in the chat or in the question and answer box for the speakers. We're going to hold all questions till the first 4 speakers are done. Thank you.
Thanks. Can you just confirm you can see my slides?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hello. It's 8 o'clock in Finland, but not later than that, so it's fine. Thank you very much for having me and letting me speak about the Finnish seed and nursery sector, which I've been working for quite some time now. So my name is Katri Hämänen, and I work as a scientist in Luke. And just one slide about our organization and where we're situated. I know you know the map of Europe, but I just wanted to point out where we're located. So Finland is located between the 16th and 17th latitude. So we are quite far up north. So that obviously puts some sort of context, or you'll see in the later slides how this sort of our geographical location kind of impacts also our nursery sector and our forestry sector. So Natural Resources Institute Finland, look at where I think this is the 9th or 10th year of our operation. So this is a combination of our joint effort from Metla, which you may know, which was the Finnish Forestry Research Institute, and then agriculture and fish and game research. And our institute we're a government institute, but we also get quite significant amount of funding from other sources, mainly EU companies and so forth. And we're located in 22 locations in Finland, Joignez-vous, where I am at the moment. So we're here in the central part of the country. And our staff is half researchers or professors and then half technical staff. And we're quite sort of also half and half women and men in our institute. And just an aerial photo of our site in Joignez-vous. So here's our main building, and then we have the research nursery facilities, and obviously our laboratory facilities are in the main building. And then I just wanted to point out, just remember these plots, 4 plots here that you see in the foreground. I'll come back to those in a moment. So I'm just going to briefly I don't know how familiar you are with the Finnish or Nordic nursery sector and seed business. Some of you may be very familiar with these figures, but others maybe not. So just to point out what the scale or magnitude of the Finnish nursery sector is, it's been quite stable for past 20-30 years. So the annual number of seedlings delivered for planting is somewhere between 150 million and a bit more. So that is roughly, then if we compare to Sweden, to our neighboring country, it's little less than half of what Sweden is producing annually. And this is partly, of course, the countries aren't equally sized, but also that in Finland, we use quite a lot of Scots pine direct seeding, so not everything is planted when we cultivate, and that is different to some other countries nearby. And all our seedling production is done in containers, so basically, again, in 25-30 years, there's really been no bare root production, so it's all container production. And what we use is these hard plastic containers pretty much all around, so no styrofoam or other materials. And the typical pot size is I guess, relatively small. So the smaller ones are for pine and in the northern parts of the country, and then the bigger ones are in the southern part of the country, used in those parts of the part of Finland. And then the growth substrate or growth media is solely this humified sphagnum peat. I'll come back to that in a moment again. So the production chains, production methodology is really sort of optimized for that. Typically, we don't really have any problems with getting good quality seed. So usually single seed sowing can be used. Most of the time, the germination percentage is somewhere between, let's say, 94 to 98. So pretty good typically. And then a sort of relatively big shift has taken place in silver birch in the past 10-15 years, is that we've started sowing that with the same machinery as the conifer species. So the seed is pelleted, and that's why the seedling production has also become more efficient for silver birch. And then the seedlings, they're stored in freezer storages. There's no official statistics about this, but I think it could be something like 60 to 70% seedlings before the delivery. They're stored in cardboard boxes in freezer storages, and then some are stored outdoors under snow cover. We have some autumn planting and some summer planting, but mostly the peak season is in May and June. So that's really busy time for these plantings. And pretty much all seedlings are planted to scarified or mounded soil. So that soil scarification is a big thing before the planting. Just a couple of sort of random images to get bit better picture. So here you can see the Scots pine seed on the left side, and then the pelleted birch seed on the right. So this is how it goes nowadays. And then just probably quite a typical seedling size and type of Norway spruce. So this is the type of container that we have. So it's a side slits to help the root development, and you can also there sort of see the pot size that is typical. Gravel or sawdust is used as mulch on top of the containers. Stopped shifting that. Yeah, here you can just see some silver birch seedlings. This is just to point out how the pot size has also decreased in the recent 10 years. So these sort of big pots used to be typical, but nowadays it's pretty much the same size as for the conifer species. So these small, let's say 85 cubic centimeter pots that are the norm. And just probably nothing new to you guys, but how the seedlings are stored before the storage. So the outdoor fields are of course covered or surrounded to protect against the walls, and then obviously the cardboard boxes in the freezer storages are also used. Then now let's go back to kind of the geographical location that we're quite north, and that means that we have, and obviously there's other reasons too, but there's very few species that are actually sort of available for silviculture, and in general the total number of tree species that are identified as domestic tree species is a bit over 20. So it's very limited, the sort of natural number of species that are available. But then the actual silviculturally important species are very narrow. There's basically the two big species. So it's Norway spruce, which is dominating in this in seedling production, and then we have Scots pine. And this is for the last 10 years of statistics that are available. So all other species, apart from Norway spruce, Scots pine, and silver birch, is very, very marginal, 0.3%. So that's very limited. Here, if we go to the what does that 0.3 consist of, we can see number of taxa, familiar to you, of course, but we can see this trend that actually in the past 20 years, it's been a decreasing trend, which of course, when we're facing the climate change, is not a very good thing. And that is one of the reasons that I'm working on now, diversifying the tree species selection. So we have a few projects working to sort of change the trend. Unfortunately, we probably should already have the statistics, but they're not online yet. What happened in the 23? So have we been able to sort of shift this trend back to a bit sort of better slope? So the key species in addition of these big three are Siberian larch, so that's the blue one there, and then black alder, Alnus glutinosa, and then Douglas fir are the next ones. And during these past 20 years, this curly birch, so Betula pendula varkarelica, has decreased quite dramatically as well. So it used to be a relatively sort of common species, but it has declined quite clearly in popularity. So as mentioned, and of course in the previous presentations as well, we're facing the issues coming from climate change, and again, being in a very northern latitude, the magnitude of the shift will be quite dramatic, or is expected to be quite dramatic. And of course, the question of maintaining forest health is becoming increasingly important. So far, Finland has not had many big problems. We have seen some increase in Ips typographus, so this bark beetle attacks in spruce, which you can see in the image as well. But basically, there hasn't been any massive fires or horrible insect outbreaks yet. But this is, of course, something that we're sort of fearing and trying to prepare ourselves for. And that is one of the key reasons why this diversifying tree species selection, both in cultivation and then also in other silvicultural practices, is discussed so much in Finland nowadays. As you may know, the role of exotic tree species is very minor in Finnish silviculture, and then both the legislation and certification schemes do not really support using them. It's not completely forbidden, but it's not a very popular route. And then our domestic broadleaf species are very limited, both in like geographical range, so they're suitable for the most southern part of the country, and also they thrive mostly on very sort of herbaceous rich sites, which are not that common. So both these things kind of create an issue that we don't really have a huge number of species to diversify with. So there's not a massive selection that we can develop on. So basically what we're trying to do is trying to support planting Scots pine and silver birch in increasing numbers as opposed to Norway spruce, and also then try to utilize these domestic broadleaves as Alnus glutinosa more than previously. And then other issue when it comes to assisted migration and sort of supporting this adapting to climate change is the fact that there is an increasing pressure to extend the rotation periods, so growth forests sort of longer to support the forest's carbon storage, and then also there is a pressure to shift more to continuous cover forestry instead of rotation forestry. So this is just sort of my thinking that there's a bit of a problem there in terms of how to really how does this active management and how this active adaptation to climate change, how can we do that with these sort of limitations that I just mentioned? But we're still working on it. Just wanted to share just one image of, in the beginning I showed the aerial photo with the sort of grid, various color mineral soil grid. So this is an extension of that, or what has been happening since that image has been taken. So we have created this stress test field. So we have heating cabinets, heating cables inside the soil, and then we have these, maybe you can see in the background, so we have these infrared heaters as well. So this last summer was the first year where we tried this, and the idea is to mimic the climate change. How does the heating of the soil and how does the heating of the air impact both the shoot growth, but of course, but also the soil respiration and how the root system functions. So this is really sort of an ongoing work, but this is part of this climate change adaptation as well. So we would be more prepared to the future situation. Then one thing that we're working on also, I mentioned this peat as growth medium, that obviously excavating the peat is not environmentally a very nice thing in terms of both the carbon and sort of hydrological issues. So there's a strong pressure to reduce this energy use of peat. But this also impacts the availability and pricing of this growth peat, which is of course key for different kinds of horticultural and food production, but also for tree seedling nurseries. So what we're trying to, in different previous studies, but also in an ongoing project that I'm running, this novel growing media, is that we're trying to find replacing substrates for peat. And the most sort of, obviously, I know that biochar and other materials and coconut is used in other parts of the world, but then we're trying to find substrates that are both sort of economically feasible and also ecologically sustainable. So we don't really want to go from peat, which is troublesome, to some other material that is also difficult to justify. So what we're looking at is, at the moment, is sphagnum moss. So moss without it turning into peat, and then different wood fibers, and then we have this cow manure digestate that seem to be functioning pretty well. But this is still something that this work is ongoing, both in commercial nurseries and in research. Then let's jump quickly into the seed production. part, most of our seed nowadays comes from seed orchards. They come in all different sizes and shapes. So Scots pine on the left and Norway spruce on the right. And then for silver birch, all the improved seed is produced in these greenhouses. So we get the background pollination controlled and so forth. And then just a few figures about how this use of genetically improved seed has shifted in seedling production in Finland over the past 20 years. In Scots pine, we can see actually quite a dramatic, or not a dramatic, but a clear change. So 15, 20 years ago, these stand seeds were quite common in seedling production, and then we had some qualified, so this first generation seed orchard seed. But then pretty much the stand seed is now non-existent, and we have shifted quite clearly to this tested class, which means that it's a 1.5 generation seed orchard material. And what does this mean for the forest growth? Well, there is a clear difference there. So obviously the source identified class means that there's zero genetic gain there. But then when we move to this tested material, then we know that the volume growth over the whole rotation period is somewhere around 24%. So there is a clear sort of shift in this material that is now used for forestry purposes. And then for Norway spruce, there's also this kind of shift from stand seed to seed orchard material, but we're sort of lagging behind in Norway spruce compared to Scots pine. And also partly this shift is due to seed import, which is coming from Sweden mostly. So we are not completely self-sufficient in Norway spruce, or have not been in the past years. And then just the final slide here is that if we look to some trends in seed production, of course this is not an completely inclusive or full list, but then just some things to point out is that last year we updated this national plan for seed orchard establishment. So the government is funding this seed orchard establishment and putting goals. And then the shifts or changes there were that we're trying to get more genetically improved seed for this Scots pine direct seeding. So not only for seedling production in nurseries, but also for direct seeding. And then that the sort of limit of availability of genetically improved material will rise to the more northern part of the country. So this is, of course, a slow change, but then this is the direction we're going. And then there is also in this novel plan more emphasis for establishing seed orchards for domestic broadleaves, not only silver birch, but also to still amp up oak seed production, Tilia seed production, and so forth. So we're really trying to push that at least it's not the seed availability that is limiting the use of these species. So this is all sort of a climate change adaptation issue. And then just one mention, in EU we have this, or in EU there is this 3 billion seedling target for 2030, so similar to what you guys have. But in addition, EU is updating this directive for forest reproductive material, which is then further put into use in the various EU countries. So this is sort of then will be a national part of national legislation once the EU directive is complete. And one new thing is that there is a plan to that there will be a national contingency plan that needs to be made in each member country, and this is to prepare for these peaks in demand of seed in case these large large-scale forest damages further take place. So this is something new. But in Finland, we're in a relatively good position because already in this plan that was made last year and even the previous one, there is actually sort of effort to make sure that there is more seed available than sort of is sort of minimum amount that can be thought of. So try to prepare for unexpected changes in the business. And then just a couple of sites that you can follow. So Nordgen is this Nordic genetic organization that has a collection of statistics for forest reproductive material from all the Nordic countries, so that may be useful to you. And then there is this OptForests project that has a nice webpage as well, which is working on this 3 billion or supporting this 3 billion new seedlings plan. And then there's just some few project links to our own projects. But thank you. So please ask questions, and you can also send me email later on if there is something that is unclear. Thank you.
Thank you, Katri. So if you can unshare, then I'll let Dave go next.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
Super. Thank you, everyone. I'm talking to you from South Surrey, British Columbia. It's home to the ancestral lands and the land claims of many Indigenous people. So to avoid missing anyone, I'll just provide a general thank you. Also, I'd like to preface my talk by saying Brian Barber's and my talk will sort of complement each other. He will talk about some of the context of reforestation in BC. And I'm really going to focus on three main things: the extension, sort of this seeds to seedlings conversions that we're often having to do in terms of operations or in terms of planning, and talk about some of BC seedling trends. I have intentionally put extension first. I think it's something that's often left to the last or totally excluded from the conversation. And for some of you who have heard this rant before, I'll give a very short one. And that's, you know, as science gets far more technical, as we dive deeper into our questions, we really have this, what I call a Grand Canyon between operations and research. And this is really where extension needs to fit in. And I'd like to thank the people who have organized this session today and others thinking about continuing this trend with other sessions. So I'll just jump right in. The first thing, Melissa's already given a brief introduction of the Tree Seed Working Group. It was formed in 1983. It is a subgroup of the Canadian Forest Genetics Association. We have really four main objectives: promoting tree seed science and technology through seed research from bud initiation to seed use, identification of seed problems related to tree improvement and forest management, the exchange of information on seed-related problems, and advising on implementation practices. Some of the photos you see here are just part of our workshops or gatherings that we've had over time. We do produce a news bulletin. I know many of you are subscribers. We currently have over 500 subscribers worldwide. We've recently published our 74th news bulletin, and Melissa tells me she's accepting articles up until April 30th for our upcoming summer edition. So we really appreciate, you know, Melissa and I formed the foundation, you know, the structure of the group, but it wouldn't continue unless we had contributions from all of you. So please join our group and please contribute so that it can continue. We do have an archive of all the past news bulletins on our website. That's not the full link. I think that's readily available at many sites. We also host a tree seed workshop at the biennial CFGA meetings. The next one is planned for Ottawa 2025, and I'm sure more details will be coming up about that over the coming year. We really look at the news bulletin as an important complement to the referee journals in terms of extending announcements, practical information, failures, knowledge and wisdom for those dealing with tree seed. So please join and contribute. Two other groups I'd like to just talk about is our UFRO Seed Physiology and Technology group. Ketri is also a member. It's not an incredibly active group. A lot of what I do tends to flow through and the tree seed working group. What I'd like to point out here is through the web page that's available, there's an incredible archive of all the proceedings, and certainly back to 1973, this was really the international source for information, the gathering point for all the researchers worldwide for tree seed. So it's an incredible wealth of information is available there. The other notable group or our website is the RINGER, or the Regeneration Nurseries and Genetic Resources Group, out of the USDA Forest Service. Obviously, two of the big publications that we often refer to are the Woody Plant Seed Manual and Tree Planter's Notes. So super resources that everybody should really be aware of. I'm just going to point to this paper, again, out of USDA, and I was really happy to see with the 2 Billion Tree Program, the same sort of supply chain or indication of activities going all the way, not just from collecting seed, but the post-planting monitoring. It's really critical. You know, my view is as we go through these different steps, we really have to pay attention to those handoffs. Those can be really the largest bottlenecks. So we want to really try to streamline those systems and have that communication as strong as possible when we make those handoffs. Any inefficiencies or problems are going to be cumulative. A seed problem is going to turn into a bigger nursery problem that's going to turn into a bigger outplanting problem. And as well as you go through the simplified version here of those 4 steps, you know, those delivery costs are going to increase dramatically. And it just, you know, seed is such an efficient means of entering the system. It's not the place to scrimp costs because you're going to pay for it down the line. We do have some very good reforestation pipeline tools in British Columbia. You know, we have the luxury of supplying probably almost half of the seedlings planted in the country, so we've had to develop some fairly sophisticated systems over time. The first one is our seed planning and registry system. It is a seedlot registry. It's also the order entry system for seedling requests for Crown land, which is the majority, 93% of our land mass in British Columbia. What we think is really good about this is really anybody can obtain access. The seed inventory for the province isn't a secret. Having people know what your inventory is allows for an exchange of materials among the parties, and some of their seed lots that they may have collected in the past may no longer be available to be planted on their lands. And so with our assisted migration systems, climate-based seed transfer, it's really important to have this. And I know sometimes some other jurisdictions think that this is really a place they don't want to go. And I just want to talk about really the benefits of having such an open system. At our local tree seed center, we also have an information management system. It's really only used for tree seed center staff. Both Concept and SPAR have a daily exchange of information. You know, the example I always give, our local system for a germination test will record all our daily replication counts or abnormals, comments, etc. While the germination capacity and the germination rate are the only things uploaded to SPAR. In terms of when things hit the ground, we also have a system called Results. I'm not going to go into that in any detail. It's a very large system. It certainly covers far more than just planting, sort of any of the silviculture interventions that are occurring on a georeference site on the landscape. I'm not going to talk too much about seed supply and demand and orchard dashboards. That's really going to be the focus of some of Brian's talk today. Just a few little points. You we need to assist with seed planning or it was formed to assist with seed planning and orchard need questions. We have really good data on seed production. I think the thing that everyone is struggling with is demand in the future. Very difficult to define. And, I think probably more than a decade ago, we came up with, the conclusion that the past is not a good predictor of the future. So how do we get a picture of what the future will look like? I wanted to cover this because I think it's really important. If you have a quantity of seed, how many seedlings is that equivalent to? We're doing this all the time. So a forester puts in a request for a few 100,000 seedlings. How much seed do we take out of that inventory? This is our system. I'm sure there's many other systems that can provide the same results. It's certainly been in place since the early 1990s, and it's been tweaked a little bit over time. Our system is really on a seed lot basis, and it really emphasizes the importance of our testing program. If someone puts in a quantity of seedlings requested for each seed lot, we know the seeds per gram and the germination capacity. We're really not, all the nurseries in British Columbia are now privatized. We no longer have the technical expertise in growing seedlings, and we're no longer really trying to deal with what sowing factor should be or what the correction factor should be. We're supplying a seed supplied per seedling, and this is really a nursery decision, how they allocate it into their sowing factors and correction factors. So we'll be referring to the seed supplied per seedling as sort of an aggregation of those factors together. And if we go through a seedling request, this is how we come up with grams. Number of seedlings requested multiplied by the seeds per seedling factor divided by the seeds per gram. This schematic just basically shows germination capacity on the x-axis, this seed supplied per seedling, and how it's changed over time. We had a very clunky system in 1996, whereas we went from kind of integer sowing factors, we had big jumps in seed usage. We've sort of streamlined that over time. Certainly people who are familiar know there's many ways to get fractional sowing. Probably the two most common are, double sowing your exterior cavities in a styro block or alternative cavities. And I'm sure nurseries have a lot of other progressive ways that they're dealing with fractional sowing. So in terms of this calculation, it occurs within SPAR, and they are downloaded to our local system concept. They're not species or genetic class specific. All the emphasis is on the individual seed lot. And again, we don't provide sowing factors or oversow recommendations. And what we found over time, there's no one set of rules that'll be perfect for all nurseries. We really look at them as starting points. And it's the emphasis on allowing nurseries to adjust grams to their needs, or in many cases, the customers are setting limits on the amount of seed that they will provide to nurseries to produce a certain seedling request. We certainly do have an emphasis on seed use efficiency, and we have screens in SPAR that help nurseries do this relatively efficiently and easily. When we look at our gram reductions, each year for the past few years, we quantify this in terms of seedlings worth of seed that we've saved. And we've really been at about 40 million seedlings over the past few years. And you just look at this graph in the red, this is lodgepole pine, and that was the initial emphasis of this program, because we're not meeting demand with that species. But certainly we've seen spruce pick up and now other species come into the mix. There's a lot that can be done. Some nurseries can reduce seed quantities from our default sowing guidelines by up to 30%. Just a little bit of dashboard background. With seed orchards producing most of the seed, it was really important to be able to predict future production. And thankfully, we have a very good data set and good predictive tools to do this. I'm not going to go to any detail on that. but I'm really pleased with the tools that we do have. Sowing guidelines, are really on a seedlot basis, but we really wanted to go up to a higher level in terms of a species-specific number for large-scale planting. Initially, the emphasis was on orchard decisions. Are there some orchards that are, much too big? Are they missing? Or do we have to expand some of the existing orchards to meet our future needs? I've provided a link here. One of the benefits of this, we were able to go beyond just seedlings requested, but through the ministry program, we were also able to obtain actual seedlings delivered. So we were able to prove the precision of those numbers. Ministry requests generally aren't representative of the entire pipeline. I guess to simplify, probably larger stock sizes than the provincial average would probably be an adequate explanation. Just a few of these that we have on a species basis in terms of our seed factors. For lodgepole pine, 1.58 seeds per seedling, interior spruce 2.42, and western red cedar at the upper end of our range, about 2.85 seeds per seedling are required. So a little statistics about our seedling production in BC. It's probably several decades where we're past bare root seedling production. I was interested to see some 2022 results where in the US, this is still about 70%. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with loblolly pine. Certainly in the Pacific Northwest, we can still see, bare root fields, but certainly there is a conversion to more container production. Just about 95% of seedlings produced are one-year-old seedlings, so our 2.0 stock is a very small part of our planting program. About 67% of our seed comes from seed orchards. A few characteristics that are unique to BC. If our genetic worth is greater than 5%, it must be used if it's available. And this really encourages the use of this seed. It's meant to increase the value of our public land base. And it's really best method for filling our long-term, mid-term timber supply that we have as a result of the mountain pine beetle that we'll be dealing with for decades. Some of our species, coastal Douglas fir, western larch, white pine, Sitka spruce, interior spruce, and red alder, all of these, greater than 90% of the seed is produced through seed orchards. Just a few little statistics. We do have much more than 6 starter block types being used in BC, but these are certainly the larger ones, so you can get an idea of the distribution. I'm not going to go through that in any detail. I think the last slide here. So we have most of our seedlings are being planted through spring planted. We do have about 21% summer planted and about 6.3% fall planted. We are certainly trying to find ways to move away from such a concentration on spring planting, but that is difficult. Certainly, as everybody has mentioned, the labor pool is a big problem. So that's a big taxation in the spring on the whole system and its resilience into the future. About 65% of the seedlings are greenhouse grown, and about 35% are from open compound, mainly lodgepole pine and western larch. I don't have a species-specific trend graph over time, and these are actually, if we were to look at last week, over the last 5 years, we are finally seeing this fall down that we've been expected in terms of planting in BC, and that's really still the fallout from the mountain pine beetle. So we do have a striking approximately 40 million seedling fall down this year. And this was really expected. We probably would have seen it sooner if we hadn't been keeping up with the fires. In terms of future pressures, you know, our old growth strategy and our 30% protected areas by 2030 are also going to play a role, and how that really rolls out, it's really unclear at present. I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Dave. That was great. So Brian's up next.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa, and thanks, Dave, for the introduction. I'll just pull up my slide deck here and get going. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for organizing the event and the opportunity to present on BC's reforestation efforts and our seed planting dashboards. Can you see the screen okay?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, thanks. All right. Yeah. So I'll start off also acknowledging I'm coming to you from Victoria, BC, on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking people. And also thanks to all the other nations upon which territories like to work and recreate. Also a shout out to International Forest Day today. So I'm going to give, most of my talk is actually going to be about the background, the context, before I get into the dashboards, because you need to understand that before you make these dashboards will make sense. So, and because we do have quite a range of participants in this meeting from across North America and overseas. So BC, Canada's westernmost province, 95 million hectares in size, the majority of which is publicly owned land. Currently about 15.2% of which is protected, and about 2/3 of the land is considered part of the timber harvesting land base, of which 50 million is our third-party certified managed forests. The current AAC, the annual allowable cut for Crown land, is 57 million cubic meters, but we didn't realize that this year. I'll speak to that later. The harvest is allocated to a variety of different tenures, both held by large international integrated forest companies and small ones, and more frequently now a number of tenures issued to communities, woodlots, and First Nations. The government's own BC timber sales harvest is about a quarter of the harvest, and their costs are used to establish the stumpage or the fees that are charged to harvest timber for others. It's BC's forest economy is it's the biggest, but it still lags behind coal and natural gas, but totaling 7.8 billion in lumber exports last year. Of course, these forests yield a lot of other values and uses, and we manage for all of those as well. But those forests are changing, as you know. Last year was a record year for fire. We thought our previous years were large, but this was pretty significant. There's also a lot of work being done to reconcile and restore relations with First Nations, including a Declaration Act to recognize UNDRIP. Dave has mentioned there's a lot of deferral of old growth forest, and then there's a new target to conserve about 30% of the land base by 2030. Collectively, all these different things are resulting in less of a annual harvest rate. So of that AEC, only 35 million cubic meters were harvested last year. Consequently, mills continue to shut down. We've lost about 50% over the last 20 years. And that all translates into fewer seedlings being planted. But we've got some good news too, that carbon storage is the new gold, and the federal government's going to assist with that with the 2 billion tree program. And we can also make our forests better adapted to climate through climate-informed species and seed selection. Now, this is a quick graph showing you the breakdown by species of the 241 million trees requested for sowing this spring. There's the top 5 or 6 now species, starting with interior spruce and lodgepole pine, followed by the Douglas fir and western red cedar larch, and ponderosa pine is increasing. almost 100% increase in demand over the last couple of years. The percentages on the right of this table represent the amount of seed that is sourced from seed orchards. So for some of these species like interior spruce and coastal Douglas fir, it's mostly from seed orchards, but we're falling short on lodgepole pine, not meeting the targets due to the location of the orchards in hot, dry conditions. So backing up a bit, who's planting these trees? Well, it's forest companies, tenure holders that have reforestation obligations under the Forest and Range Practices Act. And so if you harvest in BC, you are obligated to establish a free growing stand that's a commercially viable species above competing brush, and you got to do that at your own expense. And so most people rely on planting trees to get to a free growing state as soon as possible, but natural regeneration is also used. The people that make the decisions about what species and the stock types and number of stems per hectare, when to plant, is all made by forest professionals who use this very comprehensive bioclimatic system that was adopted in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and it really guides a lot of reforestation and forest management in BC. At the zonal level variant, and even at the site level, we're considering soils and wet, dry conditions. So the foresters of the BC timber sales government, they will grow their seedlings under contract with nurseries and then have a separate contract with a tree planting company to plant it. The seed that is used to grow those seedlings must be used in accordance with the Chief Forester standards, which I'll speak to in a minute. And then when the planting is done, they've completed, they report back what seed lots they used and what number of trees they planted back to government. The Chief Forester standards for seed use are legally enforceable standards under the legislation, and their purpose is to maintain the identity, adaptability, and diversity of BC's forests. It's also a way of maintaining the tracking seed from its where it's been collected to where it's been planted. So all that seed goes through the seed center where Dave was just speaking to us from, and registered, tested, stored there. Seed lots, whether for orchards or for wild stands, have to have a minimum effective population size of 10. So that's like 10 distinct or genetically unique trees. And if it's orchard seed, if available, then that must also be used. But very importantly, people are selecting and now planting seed in accordance with these new climate-based seed transfer standards, which were introduced by the Chief Forester in 2018. So this has shifted how we plan and use seed from geographic areas, an area and elevation band based on to one of climate, which is based on some very extensive genetic tests and information and analysis, and which also considers both past and future climate. So seed can be used in areas that have similar climate now, and the result of which is there's a lot of overlap between the deployment area of seed sources. So in the top map, you can see that the seed zones for orchards were quite distinct. There was a little bit of overlap, but when we get into climate-based seed transfer, the areas of overlap are quite significant. So this has really increased our complexity for seed planting. And we do have a number of orchards to look after, to consider here. The planning of which is done under the auspices of the Forest Genetics Council, which I won't get into in too much detail or any further detail. But we have over 100 orchards for 13 species located at 17 sites in BC, and each orchard is unique for a species and produces for a specific area. These orchards are managed by the BC Ministry of Forests on a few sites, as well as several private companies, several of whom are in partnership with Select Seed. And Select Seed is a company I work for, which is in turn owned by the Forest Genetics Council. Collectively, our orchards have produced around 70%. This year's percent's down to about 66, but we were trying to achieve 75%. But we're just coming a bit short of that because of some lower production in our lodgepole pine orchards in the hot Okanagan. So we're shifting those north. These orchards consist of parent trees selected by the Ministry of Forest tree breeders. And I mentioned they are producing seed for unique areas. And there's a considerable overlap. But what I want to emphasize here is it can take 8 to 15 years before these orchards start to produce significant quantities of seed or at their target. So it's a long-term investment. And we want to size our orchards right for the right place and for the right size. So we're not producing orchards that are too big. We can't recoup the investment through seed sales, or they're too small and they're not meeting the needs. So how do we do that? Well, we had a pretty comprehensive, easier planning system when we had these geographic-based orchards. We knew there was 2 or 3 orchards for each zone, and we could estimate the demand and the production of the orchards, compare the two. But under climate-based seed transfer, with all the overlap, these plans are basically not that useful. But what we needed to start with was predicting getting a better handle on the future needs under climate-based seed transfer. So we initiated a project in 2018 with Foresight, and we estimated what the species needs would be for each species management unit, and for the 240 different bioclimatic variants for five-year periods going out to 2049. And we did the first take at looking at what would be if we harvested the standing mature timber over the next 30 years and reforested based on pack practices, what would the amount of seedlings be for that? And we vetted those estimates with forest companies and governments, and then we refined the estimates. And what it was showing is that the total demand for seedlings was going to drop significantly from about 300 million in 2019, 2020 down to 2032 within the next 30 years. One of the most significant drops was for lodgepole pine. As mentioned, the mountain pine beetles run its course, and the shift is a harvest away from lodgepole pine stands. So the pine was going to drop, and we're actually starting to see that manifest, because the demand for pine as of beginning of March is down to 68 million. So the forecast is showing it's pretty good. It's still, but it's not complete, because at the time we did it, we only accounted for about 25 million trees from the government forest carbon, now 2 billion tree program, but that's now about the 40 to 50 million mark. So we use that data to figure out how much, what size our orchards would be for these new climate-based seed transfer pine orchards, and so we ended up putting in 5,000 rammed orchards at 3 sites managed by the ministry, Vernon Seed Orchard Company in Quesnel, as well as Quesnel Select Seed in Quesnel, new property we purchased that's in the lower left-hand corner. So that helped us with planning that step, but then we wanted to expand that exercise and the information to all species. So develop these seed planning dashboards, again with Foresight helping, and we have the seed supply and demand dashboard, which includes on the top left there, you can see all the planting, historical planting for lodgepole pine by some bioclimatic sources. You can do it by Beck variant, you can do it by orchard. You can see the beige boxes represent the amount of seed planted that was not sourced from a seed orchard, and the different colors represent seed from different orchards. The bottom set of, and out and to the right, on the top right is our forecasts for seed and whether or not we've got a gap in orchard supply, which is showing in the beige still. The bottom graph on the left shows the actual production from our seed orchards relative to its forecast, which is the line. And then on the bottom right, that is the forecasted seed production for all those orchards relative to the demand, which is the line above. You can delve into the details for all the orchards on our seed orchard information dashboard. This is a list of all the lodgepole pine orchards in the province and the geographic area for which they covered. You can drill down and select just a few orchards or areas of interest, whether it's geographic or climate-based. And again, some historical seed production and its forecasts, as well as the amount of seed that was in storage at a particular date. That isn't as current, of course, the information that's available in SPAR. But together, these orchards are these dashboards can give us a bit of a picture about what orchards are producing for what areas, and how to get in contact with the orchard managers to access that seed. We also have a couple other extra little tools there. One's called Sudoku, where you can actually look down the table of the bioclimatic variants and find orchards that are producing and how much, and if there's any gaps. So I'll just wrap up here quickly. Our next steps are to produce a directory with some matrices, so you can, as a quick lookup tool, to find out what orchards are producing for operating areas by species. Going to do a little more in-depth demonstration of those dashboards and how to use them at a date to be determined in April. The Chief Forester is going to launch an update on the seedling forecasts, which will account for some of these changes, as well as the 2 billion, the needs for the 2 billion tree program. Then we'll look at the gaps and opportunities for new orchards, and then that will trigger the ministry to help select and graft and allocate new parent trees for orchards. And then when we get those, we'll update our dashboards and repeat the process. Just a couple plugs for a couple of meetings coming up. The BC Seed Orchard Association is going to be meeting in Sydney, north of Victoria, in June. So please consider coming out west and joining us for a day of presentations and a field trip. And then the Forestier Association is going to host its biannual meeting in Ottawa in the summer of 2025. If you'd like to get updates on these events and others, you could sign up by clicking the links in the slide deck, which I'm assuming will be made available after the presentation, if not being copied into the chat. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian. So Felix, you're up next.
Yes, perfect. So Melissa, can you confirm that you see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. So my name is Felix. You can try to pronounce my first name in French, but it's pretty hard. So I was working before in Asia, before immigrating to Canada. And I was much more familiar with exotic trees like mango, sandalwood, mahogany. So today I will talk more about greenhouses for tree seedlings for reforestation. So like the main objective of my presentation is to introduce like the basic on greenhouse cultivation and to show you how the technology can help to improve, you know, like the cultivation, the labors, and many aspects. So first, very briefly about Harnois. So we are like a structure manufacturer. So on the picture here, like you can see, it's a part of our factory. So we are based here in St. Thomas, Quebec, where I am right now. So here you can see like a megadome fabric building covering a part of our factory. So we manufacture a megadome and the greenhouse is directly here in Canada. So just to give to you like some perspective, we are like a key players, of course, in Canada, in the States, and we're also like pretty active in Mexico and worldwide. So regarding greenhouses, I will say we are like in the top 10 in the world. So like it's very basic, and I can talk about greenhouses for hours, but I will try to be pretty brief today. But why a greenhouse? So like the main objective is to get maximum of free light, You know, we use like the sun radiation, we use like the photosynthetic spectrum. So this is like the most important to create an optimal growing environment. So we use a greenhouse volume, and you will see it later in the presentation to have like the perfect temperature, humidity, stability, and management inside the growing area. And then we use also, of course, the greenhouse to protect the crops against the pests and diseases. And the greenhouse for me is like a tool, you know, it's a tool for the growers to grow, to have like the germinations and the young plants, the young trees. And inside the greenhouse, we can play with the equipment, the level of technology. So we use equipment to increase the performance, the efficiency. And it's a big topic right now with the labor, to save on labor. It means to use less people to be able to grow more, to increase the density. And there is also an important thing, it's a climate change. We talk a lot about climate change, how the greenhouse can, despite, you know, like the extreme weather, it can be cold, rain, cloudy, like the last summer. I told here in Quebec, it was like very bad. How we can use a greenhouse to keep consistency, reduce, you know, like the tree, the loss, and then, you know, like have like stable quality and stable yield. So I will go like pretty short, but here, like our three main products. So I will talk first about the Tunnel Pro. Like it's what you need like to keep in mind. It's we have like different level of technology, and the Tunnel Pro, it's like the easiest low-tech option when you want to start. It's a free season. So using like the Tunnel Pro, you can do overwintering. You can start to protect your crops, to have like a dedicated fertirrigation system for trees, you know, like depending the varieties, but you can start to protect and to have like some part of automation, but semi-automation mostly for the irrigation, because it will be isolated from the rain, protected from some of the pests and diseases. And then you have the poly to have like some thermal retention and to be able to grow earlier and longer during the year. So it's quite technical and I will not go like too deep in, but the point is you can build, it's without concrete. So we use like screw type, helicoidal anchors. We have doors, the poly can be rolled peak. So if you have like if you have more questions, just contact me. Oh, sorry. Then we have like the Ovaltech greenhouse. So this is like a greenhouse, and I saw like some of them in the presentation with PRT and other tree seedlings facilities. It's pretty popular in Canada and the States. So this is the best greenhouse for, I mean, you know, like to give flexibility and to store, to grow young trees, to do germination. So it's individual. So it's without gutter. It's not connected. However, it's engineered, designed for versatility. So as you see here, you can start from 20 feet wide to 42, and 42 is a pretty big one, more volume. And one of the specs that also one particularity of Harnois, it's we use like oval tube. So oval tube, it's designed to be like stronger, like the shape, no edge. So for the poly, you can keep the poly longer on the greenhouse. And then the Gothic shape, I will talk about it like later, give a lot of strength and, you know, like the volume. So you will see why the volume, and especially during very hot summer, it's important. So an example here, this is like a facility in the western part of Canada. So you see the irrigation, the sprinklers, the ventilation. The ventilation, it's to keep the climate homogeneous inside. We do not want, you know, like hot or humidity hot spots. So this is like to keep, you know, like a very consistent climate every time. So it's working every time in the greenhouse. And then some features like the roll-ups on the sides for passive ventilation. And when I talk about Gothic shape, it brings more lights because it's a bit higher. So, you know, like when the sun is low, especially beginning, end of the day, and during the winter, you like the structure is higher. So you get more diffuse radiation, more light in, more light penetration, then more volume, more resistance because of the strength of the structures, more ventilation because you get like more opening. So more opening, it means more air recycling, it's a percentage. And then it has a big effect on reducing the dripping. So less condensation, less risk of fungus attack, it's also increased like the light penetration when you don't have like the droplets. And then the volume, like the type of greenhouse, the shape help to keep a very consistent climate. And we will see it like just a bit later. So we have also like new greenhouse concept and design. Here it's used like for vegetables. So for vegetables hardening before, like using the babies, like the young plant in open field. So we have like a greenhouse with a double structures, and it's possible to roll it at peak. So this is also used in the tree seedlings industry for overwintering. So this is a design, we have, and we just, put like some more innovation to make it, like more efficient, easy to use, easier to maintain. So this is an example of innovation for vegetables, but not only, also for the tree seedlings. And it's 42 feet wide, so it gives like a pretty big volume, a lot of light, and like a very big space to grow. Then, and I will focus more on the volume with this one, like the last tab, this type of greenhouse. It's called the Luminosa, like the commercial name. It's a gutter connected greenhouse, and it's ideal for larger nurseries operation, as you will see. So this is an example. It's still this one with purity. I was there, I took the pictures. So you see it's still Gothic, the roof. But here you have like a gutter to collect the rain and to connect like other spans. So it's like a multi-span, a gutter connected greenhouses. And when I talk about the volume, what I learned, like one of the first things I learned when I was during my agronomic thesis in master, and also when I was in Malaysia working, when it's very hot, very humid, how can we, control the climate without spending a lot of gas, a lot of energy? Because, like the volatility of the energy prices is also a big issue. So our answer is simple, is when you have like a wider plus higher greenhouse, it's much easier to play with the volume. I was talking a lot about the volume because here in the greenhouse world, we call it like the buffer effect. So the capacity of having more volume is very important because the hot air is less dense. So like the very hot temperatures and the excess of humidity will go up passively. And then here is not trees, tomato, but at the crop level, you will have a much more stable growing conditions. It means less thermal shock, less humidity shock, so less risk of developing, like fungus or liverwort issues. And then it's just passive, it's physical. So during the summer, when it's getting, above 35 degree, 40 degree outside, because inside the greenhouse, you have like the greenhouse effect, but the volume itself will help to keep with the chimney effect, a perfect climate and a good ventilation. And during the winter, we use like the line I put here is like the shading and thermal screen. We also use like equipment to retain the heat during the day and also from the heating system to save on energy. So why Harnois? Very quick. What you need to retain is we have like the expertise with tree seedlings, operation facility, and the main topic here is today it's equipment integration. So we will have like a system approach, and then our greenhouse easier to build. We are here everywhere in Canada to support the head growers, the operation manager. So this is where we work, and we have like very good success with long-term relation, like working very closely with the grower. So regarding equipment, and I will watch the time. Okay, I will have to go quick. We provide like active ventilation, climate monitoring, control, water storage. So that's very important with climate change. Fogging, how to use high pressure fogging, instead of dehumidification to just cool down without increasing the humidity to keep a very good climate without like putting like, conditions for fungus. And then artificial lighting, it's evolving very quick. I was looking at, for example, white spruce, that the far red spectrum can directly, have an impact on the stem elongation for white spruce. So like a lot of research, a lot of innovation, and this is where we can support and put technologies to help. And from the greenhouse world, the leafy greens, the vegetables and fruit, we are already doing project in Quebec, in the States, in the world, and we can use our knowledge, like everything we are implementing in other industries for the tree seedlings growers, like mobile gully system, how to use, instead of 20 people, like 4 people to manage like here, 2 hectares of greenhouses. So this is project we're already working in Manitoba, Quebec, New Brunswick, but this is an example of where we can help you. Here, a project we are currently working in New Brunswick. So it might appear this year, but it's a perfect integration with non-heated greenhouse, lower tech, heated luminosa gutter connected, and a part of it, it's for technical area, and the fabric building to store the biomass for a biomass system. And here it will be like for the wood chip. So the technical area, we use also the greenhouse to store like the machine. We will see just later with Michael, like his technology will be gathered here in the technical area, and then we use our greenhouse with the separation for white spruce. It can be like for balsam fire. Every part of the greenhouse can be dedicated with the right climate and the right equipment to control whatever you want at the right cost. So it's another project we're currently working on in Quebec. It might appear this year or next year, but it's another example of how the megadome combination, the fabric building plus the hot water storage tank. So this is where we stock like the hot water because it's easier and we have less loss when it's water compared to air. Then to feed the greenhouse for young tree cultivation with the heating system. And then the greenhouse is made with automation, rack, trays, mobile trays to be as efficient as possible by giving like the best conditions for like the trees varieties, and then be efficient using as less as energy as possible with a very labor intensive system. And when I talk about national presence and industry support, so we have with us Barry, like most of the people in the West, like with PRT know Barry. So Barry is very active supporting, like PRT and tree seedlings facilities in Alberta, Manitoba, in the western part of Canada. Robert in Ontario, Jackie, our distributors, she is a grower, more than 15 years of experience. So she's taking care of Maritimes. And with Robert, we're helping like Quebec, Ontario, and the States. And when I talk about innovation, we just launched last year the first North American fully made glass house. It's not made in the Netherlands or other place of the world, but like the particularity, this greenhouse is made for Nordic climate. It's made like it's compared to poly, it's a complementarity, like some growers will need like more lights, more durable products. They will not be, like very keen, like changing the poly on the poly greenhouses. So we have like also like the glass option for tree seedling. So we are also working some project right now in Canada. And if you need like some more information, just contact me. So like a quick summary. So Arnois, like we have like the expertise, quality product, of course, it has to resist to the climate in Canada today and tomorrow. It's getting more extreme, hurricanes, snow, the very high temperature. So this is where we are, and we are trying to innovate every day, like to get like a best, of course, return on investment and to be profitable for the public and private facilities. And our support and expertise is very important. To be able, like to give the best advice, and when you have like a question, to have like someone to reply quickly. So here, my contacts. Thank you for your attention. I think I am pretty good on time. Yeah. And if you have like any question, just contact me, and Melissa will share like the presentation and my contacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix. I realize our agenda said we were going to have a little break. I just want to double check if Katri wanted to take a question actually from one of our other panelists, if she wants to go to bed. And then I'll turn it over to Rob after that. But you're welcome to take a break right now, but I'm just going to see if Katri would like to answer Sean's question.
Please go ahead, ask the question, or is it in the chat?
I can go ahead and ask the question. Sure, that was, you answered that in part, and that was looking for replacements for peat in your system, which you had raised. But I guess if you could elaborate on how that's going.
So you're asking like how is it going? How close we are?
Well, there's use, for example, in a lot of nurseries in our region of modified forms of bark as a replacement for peat, and I'm just curious if what kinds of products you're looking at, and how your results are looking.
Yeah, well, there's quite a few products that have been tested, so different kinds of hemp fibers, reeds, barks, wood fibers, moss, this manure, digestate, and so forth, and different mixtures of that, and then mixing it also with peat, so like replacing the peat partially, biochar, of course, and coconut fibers and so forth. But the problem is that there's either sort of a trade-off, so it's not, the seedlings aren't growing as well, or then the price is too high. So for instance, biochar would work perfectly well, but then it's just like 10-20 times more expensive than the peat at the moment, so it's sort of unfeasible for the nurseries at the moment. In bark and in wood fiber, the issue seems to be that as the seedlings are grown for 1 or 2 years, as it sort of composts on the way, it increases the need of nitrogen fertilization. So you need to put more fertilization in. Probably the thing is that if we just get sort of the recipe right for the fertilization and irrigation and so forth, many of these would work, but we're like too early in the stage that we're just trying to pinpoint, or this ongoing project that we have. So we're trying to concentrate only on 3 different substrates and their mixtures, and then trying to figure out how to optimize the irrigation and fertilization to get to a decent result. So I don't really have a clear answer in terms of how close we are, or what would be the best one. But can you please tell me in your region, what is the substrate that you're using at the moment, and is peat already replaced?
I think that's why this is an important thing to address. I think that growers and the research community are also struggling with these things right at the moment, and certainly the price of biochar comes up as an important constraint.
Yeah.
But driving down the price, bigger facilities and more efficient sort of processes is definitely part of the picture.
Yeah. And one of the issues seems to be that, especially for these different biomasses like reeds and fibers and so forth, is the variability in the different lots. And that goes also a bit, I think, for the biochar in some cases. So the material isn't consistent, which creates quality issues in the seedling production phase. So actually, like getting just things more sort of standardized would help in reducing the price issues or these issues. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. I'll make one more short call for any final questions for Katri, and if she has to depart, we'll send them to her by email. We'll take just maybe a 2-3 minute bio break if anyone needs it, and then Michael Taylor will be up next. But I'll let Rob introduce the last 3 speakers in a few minutes. So
yeah,
we can come back. And...
yeah, thanks very much for having me, and please just send me email. So it's just katri.himmanen@lukep.fi. If you have any further questions, I'll get back to you then.
Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks. Bye. Bye.
So Melissa, we'll be starting up at 3:30 Eastern time.
Sure. Yeah, we'll do 5 minutes if that's okay with the other speakers. I'm sure Michael and Sean and Deb will go lightning fast. We're doing very good on time, so thank you everyone. All the speakers already. We've done great on the agenda.
Speaking of which, Melissa, I'm on for a half an hour on the schedule. That's correct.
You can have up to that much time yet?
Okay. Yeah, I've added in just a couple background slides on biochar. So
Excellent. There's a lot of people excited about this one, so. And yeah, for everyone else, the questions we're going to gather up and we will address them at the end of Deb Pella's presentation. So keep thinking of questions and throw them in the Q&A box, please, so that CIF can rank and prioritize, and you guys can always vote. So voting is good for us to help rank them. Actually, Michael, do you want to test do you want to pull up your
Yeah, I'll make sure it works.
we will show one slide with yeah, there's one more slide that I know Natasha was going to show up just to show all the sponsors again, but just even want to test yours really quick.
Can you see that okay?
You go into full screen mode just for a minute. I can go from beginning.
Where was that? It's been a while.
Upper left. Beautiful. Okay, great. Okay, so if you excellent. So Natasha, do you want to pull up the speaker slide with Sean's headshot on it, and then sponsors as well?
Yep, 1 second, I'm bringing it up.
Thank you, Brian.
Melissa or Sharon, I don't see that Ken is on the list any longer.
Oh, do you mean?
Has he signed off?
One second. Oops.
I know he wasn't planning to be on the whole session, but
Yeah, I think he's signed off.
okay. So whoever's looking at the waiting room, he might sign in this next half hour.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I guess we'll get going into the last session of the day, and I just want to again thank everybody for your attendance today. It's been great, some fascinating subjects that's been covered. Well, just want to introduce the last three speakers for today. It's really not least, and in particularly to thank our sponsors, which we see as the slide up currently. And again, it wouldn't be possible to hold these sessions, and certainly to have established the association as we did without their support and help. So again, thanks to all of you. I'm going to just give a brief introduction to the speakers for the last session. And just a reminder that everybody's bio has been posted on the chat line. So if you want to get a little bit more in depth into their background and such, you can certainly find that documentation there. I'll start with Dr. Sean Thomas, who is with the National Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and in particular, part of the Industrial Branch Research Chair in Biochar and Ecosystem Restoration. He's with the University of Toronto. Sean is an internationally recognized expert in tree ecophysiology and forest carbon processes, and in recent years has pioneered the use of biochar in forest restoration applications. And we just, of course, were having a chat about biochar earlier, so look very much forward to, Sean, to your presentation. Deb Pellikeen is the Executive Director with Maple Leaves Forever. Maple Leaves Forever is a charitable organization that supports the planting of native maples. And Ken Jewett is the founder of Maple Leaves Forever. I know Deb will be talking more about Ken and his efforts and Maple Leaf Forever and their efforts in promoting the planting of native maples. And finally, Michael Taylor, who is going to be our first speaker for the afternoon. Mike is currently working on projects across North America that increase tree production capacity for forest restoration, urban forestry, plantation forestry, and wildfire restoration. Mike spent 15 years in forestry in the Pacific Northwest, managing large-scale bare root farms, greenhouses, and a seed processing plant. Mike earned his Master of Science in Forest Science in Nursery Management and Reforestation, and a Bachelor of Science in Forest Management from Oregon State University. Interesting enough, I've run into Mike on a number of conferences that we both seem to land at. And I'm always fascinated and interested in his assessments of how to make things more efficient. Not quite involved with what he's talking about today necessarily, but always has a mind for improving efficiencies of any operations. And it's always very much enjoy catching up with Mike at these various conferences. So Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you at this point. If you're all teed up and ready to go, that would be fantastic.
All right. So I'll turn my video on for a second, but I don't trust my internet. I'm actually in Oregon right now, sitting in a car, getting a project off the ground. So
the other thing, I'll never know where to find him. He's all over North America. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, that is very true. So I'll turn it off just because I don't trust my Wi-Fi. I'm sitting outside of a little coffee shop, so hopefully they're stable enough. All right, so like Rob mentioned, I'm kind of a self-proclaimed tree nerd, super passionate about forestry and growing good trees. So I'm going to talk today on a topic that I really enjoy, which is optimizing seed usage. I've been working on these projects for a couple of years now, and I always tell people, you know, if we're going to develop something new for our industry, it has to be better at everything. Otherwise, why would anyone convert or try something different? And so I get a lot of these questions of, well, you can't do that or you can't do this. And I go, well, we just haven't thought about it long enough or hard enough to figure out how to do this better. So optimizing seed usage. Next slide. So like Felix said, the systems approach is something that people talk about a lot, right? We have to have the right technology in place throughout the whole system to really make things flow well and efficient. And my biggest pet peeve of automation is is you can't have downstream consequences to what you're doing. So automation and technology bases, right? Labor is your most valuable asset, so use it wisely. Seed is the only part of the process that money can't buy. I argue with people about this all the time. I go, if you burned, 1 million hectares, do you have enough localized genetics of that seed to reforest it? And if you don't, there's not enough, there's no amount of money that can make the right genetics, right? You have to have that in place. So we need to be far more efficient on how we use our seed. In automation, is go back in time and remove the problem. So if you're adding some step in automation because you caused a problem earlier in the cycle, then you just need to go back in time and fix it when you created the problem, instead of trying to find some new fancy machine to undo what you've already done. And we could talk about lean manufacturing and all of that, but really we just need to be more efficient at everything that we do when we start talking about these big tree programs. So the vision, 1 seed equals 1 tree, right? That is something that we are actually really terrible at. I was at a nursery in the Northwest just this morning, and I'm walking past their trays and I see 3 or 4 germinants in every single cell, right? That's crazy. We're wasting seed, and we're going to spend a ton of money pulling out 3 perfectly good trees and throwing them away. As we work to, on scaling for 2BT and other programs, we really just need to be more efficient. Thinning is very expensive and it wastes seed while adding a bunch of labor. We need to remove these non-value added steps. We can't do things that don't make the tree or the system better. It's just wasted effort and wasted energy. And the big saying is, don't spend money on something you can't sell. If I pull out 3, germinants and throw them away, that didn't make the 1 tree left better. So I spent a bunch of money and I'm not able to sell those 3 dead trees. And then my biggest pet peeve, don't ship your problem to the next department. So how do we become more efficient with seed? There's processes and things that people have done over the years. There's a ton of different tray technologies out there to do this. This is nothing new, right? Ray leach tubes were, invented 50 years ago with the purpose of being able to consolidate native tree species that had really variable germination. So we need to be able to, gotta move this little window out of my way. There we go. We need to be able to sow 1 seed per cavity and then consolidate the blanks to keep our greenhouse full. We need to reduce labor on thinning extra germinants. The big selling point is you save labor and you're saving trees, right? It should be something that people could really get behind, but I'm amazed at how much pushback I get on it. So I use the 2BT program. What would it actually take to make 2 billion trees? We have column 1, which is our thinning, which is our traditional method. And there's obvious reasons for this, right? This is nothing, greenhouses are expensive. They're expensive to heat. So we need to be very efficient with them. So we have this, what we call an acceptable empty rate of 1.5%. That's pretty standard across the industry. I've seen people at 2, I've seen people at 0. It's just a matter of what your costs are to make your business function. So we have our traditional thinning standard. I just put in a germination of 85%, germination failure of 15. So seeds per cavity, the seed drop rounded is 2.21, and that's the actual number that the math says we should put in there. Fractional sowing is a very useful technique. But I just rounded it up to 2.5 for ease. So total seeds, right? 6 billion, sorry. 6 billion seeds to make 2 billion trees. And what I'm saying is we got to think harder and go to a consolidation method. So the 1.38 oversow is the calculated oversow using the germination and failure rates. Seeds per cavity is 1, total seeds 2.7 million. I normally don't do videos embedded. Oh, it is working.
Mike, you might have to talk over it. I'm not sure there's any sound coming through.
Was there no? I hear it in my ears. Okay, just a second. So it might be just trying to connect to my headphones. So here we are. So this is, we did a video. So this tray right here is a traditional sow. We did 2 seeds per cavity. And then the one on the right side of the screen is a single seed sow with consolidation. So there's the germinants that are left over, right? I thinned that tray, and there's like most of these are perfectly acceptable trees. So we'll come over here, and Scott, you know, he didn't believe me, right? Growers don't believe me on these things. So I told Scott, I go, let's do a trial. So half of your crop how you normally do it, and so the other half of your crop the way I want you to do it. And we did it, and now he's like, we need to tell everyone about this, right? Let's consolidate back. So the bottom line is it took me 6 minutes to thin out this tray of 2 seeds per cell. It took him 2 minutes to consolidate because he's only looking for empty cells and then replacing them with a full cell. Let me get to the next slide here. So most people tell me when I go through this, they go, well, I don't have that kind of greenhouse space, right? I don't have 38% extra space to sow my crop. But we're just not thinking hard enough about it. You know, this grower in this photo, he just stacked a couple of racks at the end of every row and said, this is enough when I consolidate, you know, in a week or two to go through and use the germinants from the trays on top to refill my greenhouse to keep it full. He also turns the cells over in the, you know, when he's consolidating the empties and then resows in the empties. So we can reduce labor, right, by 70% by just consolidating. We're save our seed, 60% on seed savings. It just means we can make more trees with what we have. It just takes a little planning to make sure you can keep your space full, right? You have to be able to think about how you're going to sow your crop, right? There's, you know, no one ever sows their whole nursery in one day. So you have things you can do. You can sow your crop, and then as you're sowing, you can be consolidating. And then as you create space at the end of that, you can refill that with another crop, and maybe you stack a few trays at the end. People that are really thinking about this have come up with some really unique ways of doing it. This one is a newer one, but it's like, why not stack them at the end of the greenhouse, and then, you know, in a couple of weeks they just use them, and then they're full again. So back to this 2BT thing, right? Germinants to thin, 2.7 billion. That means we got to spend labor on thinning 2.7 billion trees. Well, I've timed this many, many times. The time per touch, right? How long it takes me to pull a germinate out versus how long it takes me to pull a cell out and put a new one back in. The 6 seconds is higher than it actually is. I got better with time a lot, but I leave it there because I don't need it to be to tell the story, right? So man hours, 1.275 million hours versus 688,000 hours. Labor costs at $16 an hour. Seed cost, I did a penny. Some seeds far more valuable a penny. Some seed is much less valuable than a penny. But the story is really there. You know, you're almost $100 million in seed and labor to throw away trees versus consolidating 412 million empties on the 2 billion tree. So even if you, in this, I said, hey, I'm not going to reuse these cells, which is silly, you should. But I said, what if I just said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to reuse them. I'm going to throw them away. Well, it's still roughly half the cost. So these are the things we really need to push ourselves and others to really think through how they do their processes. So I cut it short purposefully because I figured there'd be people asking questions. I have other things that I could go over, but I wanted that to really, since I was asked to really talk about seed, I think it's, I usually get a lot of questions on it. So any questions at this point?
Mike, we're gonna have everyone put it in the Q&A chat, and Natasha will curate them at the end. So if you would like to finish early, it gives Sean and Deb a bit more time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of my main point, is really just trying to get people to think of how to, use seed more wisely. As we look at doing these massive, massive projects, we really have to think about seed, because we can't replace that asset. I can build more greenhouses, I can buy more heat, I can do all of these things, but I can't make seed out of thin air,
Perfect, Mike. That's really good, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness on that. And again, always to the point of looking for those efficiencies. You really have a lot of good figures there to contemplate for folks. I'm going to ask Sean now if you're able to tee up your presentation.
I've got it there.
Awesome, thanks, Sean. Way to go.
Okay, that was a great lead in. I'm honored to follow that very sensible on key thing, and this actually fits together really well. I'll be talking about biochar, and particularly its use for seed coatings in the context of precision aerial seeding, and a bit about the prospects and some early results. Okay, so a few years ago, there was a lot of visibility of the potential for drone-based seeding, and I think there's a big picture, right? If there are accessibility issues, certainly in Canada, for conventional planting, and so the potential that one could use precision seeding to avoid, we all are, we've been talking all day about how valuable seed is. And so conventional aerial seeding, you end up with drift and, huge amounts of seed wasting. So the potential for conserving seeds by placing them much more precisely is appealing, and the drone technology is there for doing that. But there's real challenges in terms of the drone technology and seeding success. And one aspect is that you, in almost all cases, you will need some kind of seed coating for this to have a larger mass, to prevent things from drifting around, and to have something that's very consistent for running through a feeder. And there's this lack of research in general, but certainly peer-reviewed studies on this. And more broadly, and something interesting, there's a very large agricultural industry on seed coatings. Seed coatings are used on a gigantic scale. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry in agriculture, but most of the recipes are held as trade secrets. They're not even patented. So there's really no visibility, and very, very few peer-reviewed kind of visible studies. Okay, so biochar and how that fits into this, I want to give a little bit of background, and I know this has already come up to some extent. So biochar is defined as pyrolyzed biomass, so it's a form of charcoal that's designed and intended for use as a soil amendment. So what pyrolysis is the thermochemical decomposition of organic matter in the absence of oxygen. And biochars have received a lot of recent attention from a carbon sequestration, climate change mitigation perspective because they're very, very stable. So there's a small, maybe 10% labile fraction in most biochars that can be decomposed, but most of that carbon is locked up in a form that will stay in the soil for hundreds to thousands of years. That has this kind of big picture consequence that in contrast to most forest systems where there's roughly a balance between carbon uptake and carbon loss, if one can take the waste materials from managed forestry and pyrolyze a substantial fraction of that, or similarly from agricultural processes, that can be a major interruption in the global carbon cycle. And so the estimates are that one could offset, if that's implemented on a large enough scale, something like 25 to 30% of current carbon emissions. So it's really a non-negligible part. That's been highlighted in recent kind of climate change research agendas of the kind of 5 existing technologies for negative emissions for taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. One of those is to plant trees. So carbon-centered reforestation, which that's what 2BT is all about. But there's another set of existing technologies. Part of that is forest conservation. So conserving the forests that are most important as carbon sinks. Changing forest management. We already heard about extended rotation lengths in Finland, for example. There's something, especially in Europe, called biomass energy with carbon capture and storage. So using, say, fast-growing plantation species, things like willow, and locking up the carbon then that's used for bioenergy purposes. But the other one that figures very prominently is production and applications of biochar. Just a little bit on biochar physical and chemical properties. At a macro scale, biochar will retain the cellular structure of the feedstocks. The smallest scale, it consists of these plates of cross-linked benzene kind of molecules with other chemical groups kind of at the periphery. Those are stacked in a way and then arranged in a kind of chaotic fashion at a larger spatial scale. So it shares attributes with activated carbon or activated charcoal, and some biochar is a type of that, but most activated carbon in North America, in Europe, is generated from coal, which has a different chemical structure. So biochars vary quite substantially with the temperature of that pyrolysis process, and also with characteristics that kind of spill over from the feedstock. But you can, as you raise the temperature, you'll get less biochar produced, and it'll have more of these kind of plate-like structures and less of those peripheral kind of groups that are important in nutrient exchange. For example, so usually for any kind of agriculture, forest application, you're looking at relatively low temperature biochars, meaning say 500 degrees, 600 degrees Celsius, something like that. You can use a really wide range of feedstocks. There's a gigantic literature now, but things beyond woods, you can use agricultural residues, sewage sludge, almost anything. Rice husk is probably the most popular source of biochar feedstock in Asia. Canada, most biochar is made from low-value wood fibers. So sawdust would be the lowest value, but bark residues, low-value wood chips, hog fuel, kind of mixed residues. But it's important to point out that there's a spillover from the kind of wood that's used to the chemistry of the char. So you tend, for example, to have heavier elements be concentrated in the charcoal, and different woods vary quite substantially in their elemental composition. So, for example, maples have, as a rule, very high calcium concentrations, and then that gets concentrated in the charcoal. So you get these kind of high calcium chars. Okay, these have been around. Obviously, charcoal has been around for a long time. There's a fascinating history of work on this, a lot of which has kind of been rediscovered quite recently. So Justus von Liebig, people might know from Liebig's Law of the Minimum. He did some of the kind of first work on growing plants in charcoal, and he became kind of obsessed with this in his later life. And Liebig, who gave us NP and K, right? A very major figure. He is buried in charcoal. Another figure, early kind of 1800s, was Patrick Matthew, forester, who published a version of natural selection about 30 years prior to Darwin. And he also basically pointed out that for forest restoration purposes, you wanted the black material and not the white material. So the charcoal and not the ash. And that goes back, incredibly far, 1820s or so. Another fascinating bit that those diagrams that I just showed you of the kind of structure of charcoal, the person who did that work initially was none other than Rosalind Franklin, who I know there's some geneticists in the audience here, and they will know her as the X-ray crystallographer who worked with Watson and Crick to describe the structure of DNA, and then was not on the paper and did not get the Nobel Prize. But she went on then to work on this similarly challenging problem of the chemical structure of charcoals, and wrote all those papers. So this is, kind of, there's this illustrious scientific history connected with charcoals, as well as this kind of deep history of indigenous use. So about 2% of the soils in the Amazon basin are these anthropogenic terra preta soils that have charcoal incorporated in the soil. So part of the kind of recent interest in biochar has been this indigenous cultural connection, and there's kind of parallels and a lot of First Nations groups here in Canada who are really keen on kind of thinking about charcoals as a rediscovery of their own pyrocultures. Okay, so coating seeds. There's a pan coating apparatus in use. That's Seed the North setup that we have replicated here in my lab. So this kind of a process, you need a binding agent, and that works really well to coat one and strictly one seed with charcoal. You need some kind of binding agent to be used. That process mostly using kind of a mixed conifer, slow pyrolysis, lower temperature biochar. And a lot of that work, the easiest binding agent to use and what's been used commercially here in Canada has been polyvinyl acetate. We'll come back to that. Okay, there's a big literature on biochar in its role in holding water and holding seed nutrient and holding mineral nutrients in the soil for benefits of seed growth, but there's different physiological processes that are relevant to seedlings. So there's the whole hormonal breaking of seed dormancy. There's possible temperature effects. There's effects on the stability of the water. Avoidance of ice crystal formation in the field is an important consideration. And then, avoiding of dry conditions, biotic factors like damping off fungus, And then the whole early process of ion regulation in germination process, and then early radical expansion. So there's actually quite a lot of biology to work out on how charcoals intimately interact with seedlings per se. So the seeds during that germination and early development process. We have conducted in my lab some field trials where we have sort of tea bag sized sets of seeds that are put out in biochar, and you can get quite strong positive effects of this. So this is from a trial done kind of in situ here in central Ontario. Some species do show a germination boost, but the big benefit that we found from this study was that early radical extension, early root development was strongly stimulated, about a 2.5-fold increase on average, but big kind of differences among species in that biochar bonus. So we do, think that there's really, in the field, you can see pretty big benefits. Point out another study done in here in the northern boreal, we looked at natural post-fire pyrogenic carbon that's produced, and then you find this gets redistributed on the soil surface after a fire, and so there'll be areas where you'll find 3, 4, 5 centimeters deep of charcoal, and then other areas that are bare, right? So looking at jack pine here, we see this peak in biomass development at about 50 to 60 tons per hectare. That's about a centimeter or so of char deposition depth. I'll point out here, this is on a log scale, so that peak from nothing up to about 50 tons per hectare is about a 5-fold increase in tree biomass. So this is quite a large effect. Okay, so we were interested then and had really good reason to think that there would be benefits that one could see to early seedling development from biochar. This was our very first study on this, where we definitively found large reductions in germination and seedling growth. And at the same time, then if we grew them in the greenhouse, those same seedlings up with the same coatings, we would see a benefit. And, from the hydrological literature, you'd think maybe this is a water table fluctuation effect. I've seen that in various publications, that the WTF, meaning water table fluctuation, but something was going on here that we clearly did not understand. And an obvious thing that we looked at in detail then is the binding agent, so polyvinyl acetate. And that clearly, in this case, had very potent germination inhibitory effects. So PVA is phytotoxic. Going back through the literature, the kind of peer-reviewed published literature on seed coating or pelletizing studies, we found basically people found benefits of biochar coating only where they used binders other than polyvinyl acetate. And on average, there was a big reduction, but really high variability in the coatings that were using PVA as a binding agent. So what's going on? So polyvinyl acetate is considered non-toxic. It's even used in some processed foods. But it's also known that polyvinyl acetate reacts with bases to form polyvinyl acid plus acetic acid. The kind of commercial mixtures of polyvinyl acid will also contain some of the monomer, and that is toxic. So acetic acid can be quite potently phytotoxic. And we think that combination of biochar plus polyvinyl acetate is what the specific problem is. And we can see this reaction. You mix these, you can see bubbling, right? There's a CO2 is produced as a product. And so that's certainly happening, and acetic acid is a problem. We've also found if you take those same coated seeds and you leach them, you get basically are getting rid of the acetic acid, that you reverse that inhibition effect. So it's a chemical effect, not kind of a physical inhibition effect primarily. So there's a very simple take-home message to this. The other name for polyvinyl acetate is white glue, wood glue. That should not be used as a binding agent. The company we're working with, Seed the North, is currently using either hide glues or starch as their binding agent, but there's quite a number of interesting alternative binding agents that really need to be looked at. I'll point out right away, so this issue of biochar cost has come up. There's a ramping up of biochar production. So this particular company, BC Biocarbon, they have 2 new plants that I think are now both in production or nearing production in the lower mainland in BC and also in Saskatchewan. So their processing capacity is going up by about 50-fold this year. And they have a very efficient system worked out. One of the issues that comes up, though, is about 25% of their output will be these very fine particles that tend not to be useful directly as an additive. So they're keenly interested in binding those, and that would be those kind of biochar granules that would be produced would be the most likely thing to go into soil mixtures on a commercial basis. Okay, so that's a necessary background. Our first large-scale field trial done with Seed the North was at a very remote site in near Nadina Mountain in BC. This is an area where there were severe stand replacing fires in 2017 that were sufficient that the seed crop was completely killed off. And we were working in an area where the forest and the topsoil had been completely burnt off. And yeah, pretty large scale trial, more than 300,000 coated seeds put in about a 3-hectare area. But this was all this early stage where polyvinyl acetate was used as the binding agent. Our results from this, as you might have expected, the conifers did not do well. This was last year, and there was a May heat wave that also killed off basically all of the planted seedlings in this area. So it may not be surprising that our conifer regeneration, regardless of the coating, was not successful. I'm sure that was exacerbated by the use of this particular binding agent. However, this was fantastically successful experiment in terms of regeneration of Arctic lupin. So about a 20-fold increase in the field in Arctic lupin establishment. This was planted as a companion for the conifers. So it was not really the intended crop. And it was a germination response. The seedlings themselves were no different in size, but there's this tremendous germination response. We looked in the lab at this as well for a number of species, and also with the same kind of beta version coated seeds that Seed the North was producing. For most species, the seed coating was spectacularly a failure, but for Arctic lupin, it was a fantastic success. And our speculation is that this is a signaling kind of hormonal effect. It's known that among the other organic molecules that are absorbed by charcoals during the pyrolysis process, those include these 2-ringed carbon structures called characins or strigolactones. And those are something that in many fire-dominated systems, it's been studied very extensively in Australia, these play a signaling role and can trigger germination. This has been really little examined in northern ecosystems in general, but it looks, and we strongly suspect that lupin at least has this keratin signaling, and the PhD student involved in this work is currently doing a survey. This is in collaboration with NTSC. Thank for sending over lots of seeds to look more specifically at kerakins as a trigger for germination across our species. And this kind of surprisingly hasn't been done before. Just end up here with work that's just currently finishing up here. So an issue that comes up with biochar has in general a good set of plant nutrients, including the ions that are most important in the early germination process, so particularly potassium, phosphorus, calcium. But most of the nitrogen is lost or bound into the structure of biochar. So biochars tend to be really low in available nitrogen, and they will immobilize nitrogen. And so certainly in agricultural applications, usually you want to co-apply forms of nitrogen together with biochar. And this is an obvious thing to do for seed coatings as well. We're really specifically looking at brewer's spent yeast as an additive to biochar-based seed coatings. Brewer's spent yeast is produced, through brewing. Through any brewery will produce large amounts of this. It's typically waste material that has to be disposed of. Has a very high RNA content. Works really well as a slow release nitrogen fertilizer and has kind of good physical properties. So our early results here this is from an undergraduate project, particularly on poor substrates. We get really good boosts in early germination, early seedling establishment from this combination of biochar and spent brewer's yeast. And we're looking at then optimizing that, and also looking at some alternatives to coating processes. Here we're have some experiments, and there's a couple other groups doing this, of kind of small cookies. They look more or less like French macarons for distribution. Okay, some concluding thoughts on this. I mentioned talking about the Nadina Mountain area in BC. I was very impressed by this area. I've been into a lot of post-fire stands, but I had not seen this kind of a high temperature fire in which there was no regeneration at all. And there were really large areas of these kind of ghost forests. This is a forest that's 5-6 years post-fire, and there's absolutely no tree regeneration. And these areas are an enormous problem for conventional planting because they're safety hazards. You can't send a planting team in there. And the only way that I can think of actually getting reforesting those, I mean, this will eventually potentially reforest if seed blows in and the residual forest falls over, but this is, many decades. So to accelerate any kind of forest regeneration, the only way I can think of doing that is drone-based seeding. And so these technical problems, I think, really have to be worked out as a response to climate change, which is creating not only more fire, but more of these extremely hot fires where you're basically getting no regeneration. And I will stop there. Have lots of people to thank, including especially industrial partners, BC Biocarbon and Seed the North. and then that students, especially Esther here, but I presented data from all of these students. So thanks very much, and I hope I'll get some questions as well.
That's great, Sean. Thank you so much. That was really very, very interesting. I'd like to now move to Deb Pellikeen to present for Maple Leaves Forever. We do have a number of questions that have come through, Sean, a number for you. And so if we can get, we'll have Deb present and then move on to answering some of the questions. Deb, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rob, and the NTSE for the opportunity to provide some information about the mandate of Maple Leaves Forever. I'm just going to turn off my video here because it's distracting. I'm the executive director of Maple Leaves Forever. The founder, Ken Jewett, is in the webinar as well. And so when we have the Q's and A's, if Ken wants to join in to answer any of the questions, that's what we're hoping will happen. So the Maple Leaves Forever is a unique charitable foundation that's focused primarily on promoting and supporting the planting of native maple trees grown from locally sourced seed, and that is adapted to assure resilience and genetic integrity for future generations. Can you see the holes, or is oh, there we go. The genesis of this charity started almost 25 years ago with our founder, Ken Jewett, pictured here with his dog, Amy. And at the time, Ken was sourcing maple trees to plant at his farm in Southern Ontario. He discovered it was almost impossible to find a nursery in Southern Ontario that offered native maples sourced from Ontario seed and grown in Ontario. Most nurseries at the time were sourcing their maple stock from Oregon. Sorry, Michael Taylor, on this. And for the international audience is on the west coast of the United States, nowhere near Ontario from a seed source perspective. As well, Ken found that many of the maples being grown by the nurseries and offered to the public were non-native, invasives, or cultivars. So for many reasons, some patriotic, since maple is our arboreal emblem in Canada, but mostly ecological, Ken determined that this must change. So since the inception of Maple Leaves Forever in 1999, Ken has contributed over $4 million to support the work of MLF and other organizations that encourage environmental responsibility and native tree planting. For example, MLF was a founding sponsor of the Canadian Tree Nursery Association, to which Rob Keane spoke to at the start of the seminar. Ken's mission is, in a simple sentence, is, in Canada, if you're going to plant a maple tree, it should be a native Canadian maple tree. Hard to argue with that. So I thought, because of our international audience here, I should maybe provide a little bit of a backdrop about what are native maples in Canada. So there are over 150 species of maples worldwide, most grown in Eastern Asia, with 10 that are native to Canada. These are pictured here. 7 of these are found generally from Ontario east to New Brunswick, and 3 are native to Western Canada, the big leaf, the vine, and the Douglas. So native Canadian maples are an important part of our natural ecosystem in Canada. They are common species found out through the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence forest region and the deciduous forest regions of Ontario. Native maples are naturally adapted to the local climate, site conditions, and growing with other Indigenous species, and they are an important part of our natural heritage. They are relatively resistant to weather events, For example, native maple trees were found to fare better and recover the best in our 1998 and 2013 ice storms in Ontario, versus the non-native maples, which tended to be damaged, fully damaged. In addition, pest problems tend to be minimal, as the native Acer genus has evolved with local insects and disease pathogens. So they've evolved to be able to sustain those. So native maples, like other native species, support natural ecosystems and enhance biodiversity. Local wildlife, including pollinators, have a special ecological relationship with native vegetation that has evolved over centuries. In general, native trees provide benefits above and beyond those of non-native or cultivated species. As Ken found out years ago, a few horticultural nurseries were, and to this day, growing and supplying native maples for planting projects. Instead, they're growing and supplying a number of maple imposters, we like to call them. One significant example is the Norway maple, which is native to Europe and Western Asia. It was widely introduced to cities and towns in Canada after World War II and became the most frequently planted street tree in the eastern and north central United States and Canada. Many years later, we have noted the ecological impacts of this introduced non-native Norway maple. It has the ability to become a serious invader when it spreads from the original planting sites into nearby natural habitats. While awareness of its invasive potential has increased, there are still several Norway maples and various maple cultivars sold in nurseries today. So at MLF, we're trying to create awareness about the benefits of planting native maples instead of non-native or cultivars. Doing presentations like this, we want to get our message out to the public, municipalities, nurseries, and landscapers. We do this through our social media initiatives as well. And it would appear that Canadians are very interested in the native Canadian maple and the work we do. Our website gets on average 10,000 hits per month, with people looking for information on native maples, where to buy them, tree care, and our planting subsidy program. We have over 12,000 Facebook followers, 3,500 Twitter followers, and a growing list of subscribers to our newsletter. We had over 2,000 in 2023. So part of our work is the advocacy that we do to encourage the planting of native maples. So one of the best examples we have is that our founder encouraging others to adopt his vision of only grown in Canada native maples. And this happened at the national level. We discovered that the National Capital Commission in Ottawa was sourcing maples from Oregon for planting on lands in the capital of Canada. Surprisingly, they had been planting a number of non-native maples almost as often as native maples. So MLF initiated a 7-year campaign, including a half-page ad in the Ottawa Citizen, to get the NEC to switch to native maple, to commit to switch to native maple trees. Finally, in 2015, the NCC announced when planting on NCC lands, if the planting calls for a maple tree, it will be a native Canadian maple tree. A long road to get that commitment. So our plan is to reach all municipalities and planting organizations together to garner the same commitment. It's partly motivated by patriotism, but mostly ecological. And who could not agree that native maples should be a priority over non-native maples and cultivars? So we've created this community honor roll list that we're hoping to grow quickly. So this next slide is to talk about, we would like to encourage an interest and demand in planting native maples. And so Maple Leaves Forever has established a roadside tree planting program that reestablished a roadside tree planting program that was started in the late 19th century. So for several years, in the late 1800s, farmers were provided with incentives to transplant maples and other species from their woodlots to line roads and laneways. This was done mostly to try to mitigate the ecological impacts of widespread deforestation that had resulted from settlement in southern Ontario. Here are a few historic pictures that show you the extent of these impacts. So today, when you drive through rural Ontario, you will see remnants of these magnificent rows of trees, mostly sugar maple, along roadsides, farm laneways, and property boundaries as a testament to this era. So we are hoping to, by renewing this initiative that was started in the late 1800s, we're hoping it will help restore this important and iconic piece of Canada's natural and cultural heritage landscape, and at the same time, create awareness about the benefits of planting native maples. We have contributed to the planting of an equivalent of 2,000 kilometers of native maple trees in southern Ontario roadways and laneways. We're pretty proud of that, and it will be a testament to future generations. Now, you can create a demand for native maples, but you also need to encourage a reliable supply. We have currently over 20 nurseries who have dedicated themselves to planting, to growing native maple trees from locally sourced seed or liners. This is a partnership that we have, and they range partnerships range with large wholesale operations to smaller family-owned businesses all across Canada, Ontario. This program has really been mutually beneficial as it presents an opportunity for nursery partners to encourage and promote native maple trees to their sales to their customers. And we would love to grow this network. So if there's any other nurseries that you know of that would commit to growing native maples, we would certainly be interested. So I would like to ask an audience that I know is like preaching to the converted, but many of you are well positioned to embrace native maple trees in your work. I just saw in Michael Taylor's presentation that maples responded really well compared to other species to biochar. So there, one small contribution to our mandate. We're hoping that you can help us promote the sourcing, growing, and planting of native maples. We need to encourage the demand for native maples, and if there is demand, the nurseries will adapt and grow what is needed. Thank you very much for your time, and you can reach me here at Maple Leaves Forever. Here's our website, and I appreciate your interest, especially last presentation of the day. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. And certainly, got to commend Ken and Maple Leaves Forever and your efforts for your commitment to promoting the use of native maples, in Ontario and wherever they're being planted. Certainly, it fits so well, in my opinion, with the work that we're all doing with regards to seed, with regards to growing stock, and really promoting the use of native species in any of our efforts for, as you pointed out, Deb, all the ecological benefits that native species provide versus ornamentals and such. So again, thanks to you for doing that, and again, thanks to Maple Leaf Forever for your continued support of the association. It has been invaluable to allowing us to move forward. We're going to move into Q&A now, and I believe Natasha is going to field some of the questions that have been forwarded, and a lot of excellent questions for sure. So Natasha, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. And just on that note, we're going to, once the Q&A is more or less wound up. I'm going to be staying on, and I think Melissa's going to be staying on this line, the webinar. And for anybody that wants to ask further questions, in particular, some of our nursery members, we'll certainly provide that opportunity. I know it's pretty fantastic to have an opportunity to have a national a meeting here at that national level. So we'll certainly keep that available to you. So Natasha, kick it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And we do have quite a few questions to get through. So there were some from, I think, Dave's presentation a little while ago. So I will, hopefully Dave is still online. I saw him on the panelist list. Yeah, okay. So there's one question here. It says, were you able, or is there a limit to what amount of seed can be requested in SPAR by a single customer?
No.
Okay. Okay, so then
and maybe I should just follow up on that. You know, the seed that is in storage, it's the responsibility of whoever has the license to reforest. They either own the seed or they're buying the seed from someone else. The provincial government, we're the caretakers, the stewards of the seed. We don't own the seed. There is a government ministry, BC Timber Sales Program, that also owns seed, but it's not like we're the owners and distributing. We're the stewards for the seed.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And there's another question here, I guess kind of follow up on the same topic. Is 23% of seed in SPAR wild collected? And is it all considered Class B? And it looks like someone did answer that, says Class B and B+.
I don't understand the question. We used to have this superior provenance designation for seed, which is the B+. With our climate-based seed transfer, that's mainly gone away in terms of its benefits, which was a wider transferability. But I don't know where that 23% comes from.
Okay, it looks like the question was answered by Kasparis, who mentioned Class B and B+ from Superior Providence. So there's another question here, Dave, for you too. The question is, what percentage of the burned area by wildfire is planted?
Not a clue.
Okay, and I think there's one question that wasn't in the Q&A pod, but is in the chat for you as well. So someone commented that they find the seedling ratios high, even for 99% to 100% germination, it is 1.76. Do you think our seed is undervalued when we are thinning away such a large percentage?
Again, I think when we're dealing with those factors, it isn't simply a thinning factor. I think even if we have germinants, not every germinant would form a seedling. And certainly, you know, those are our baselines, and we do very much, you know, emphasize seed use efficiency. So, yeah,
okay.
That's what it is. You know, our first thing is not undersupplying seed. We want to make sure that people meet requests, because there are some severe repercussions if you can't meet your orders for your clients.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Dave. I think those are all the questions for you. So I guess, Sean, you have some questions as well in the Q&A pod. So the first one's a bit of a longer one. On one hand, trials have shown for years that the presence of soil mycorrhizae can enhance conifer seedling root growth and outplanting survival. I've also read papers showing that biochar can affect overall soil microbe activity and diversity. Can you comment on whether biochar has been shown to have an effect on beneficial soil bacteria and fungi and seedling survival rates after outplanting? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a complicated picture. Biochar is quite alkaline, depending on its feedstock and the production characteristics, and that tends to favor bacteria initially. As it gets oxidized in the soil, it'll become more acidic, and you sort of get later colonization by mycorrhizae. So whether or not those are the beneficial ones is a more complicated thing. With the biochar-based seed coatings, something that we are looking at and have some publications on is using beneficial inoculated, especially by plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, and those are people in the nursery industry might be familiar. There's quite few approved kind of inocula that can be used, but some of those really work well together with biochar, and so that's I think the kind of applied options are probably using those licensed products that are kind of known bacterial strains that are beneficial, or potentially allowing kind of a in situ colonization. So either timing things that you'll get the things colonized, or potentially putting out your coated seeds for colonization by kind of native microflora. So of course it's a complicated picture.
Okay, thank you. The next question here is the polyvinyl acetate alone phytotoxic or just in combination with the biochar?
Yeah, both. So the trials were done with just polyvinyl acetate isolated, but we think that it's reacting with the biochar and becoming more phytotoxic, or that the chemical products are phytotoxic. And it's also the case that there may be bases in the seed coats that are reacting with the polyvinyl acetate. So there are most seeds kind of has acidic coats, but there are some with basic alkaline coats, and those would react with the PVA and produce problems. So I guess both.
Okay, thank you. And one final question as well for you is, I have read the article in the TSWG Bulletin in 2002. Since that was published, I have been wondering if any additional species have been or are currently being tested for germination results when working with biochar coatings or soil amendments.
Yeah, I mean, we're not the only research group that's looking at this. So there's, I think, yeah, particularly internationally, there's a lot of interest from kind of restoration in more desert environments and that kind of thing, where the water holding capacity may be really important. But overall, there's positive effects that have been found of biochars in combination one way or another with seeds in general at the early seed germination stage. But you certainly have to get the other parts of the recipe right. And I mean, I think the PDA message is quite important. I know there's the industry. I mean, I know there's nurseries that have been using, say, diatomaceous earth coated seeds that use PVA. And I've talked with some industry people, and they've said, "Oh yeah, those seeds that we always have, a bit lower success with those." And that's a problem that needs to be solved. We've been talking all day here about efficiency and the value of seed, and so working out those recipes so you're really getting the most from your seed is critical.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Sean. And I think those are all the questions you had in the chat and the Q&A. Deb, you also had a few questions as well, so I'll read those out for you. As you folks have grown, have you considered expanding your mandate, considering how these issues impact other native species, as well as considering the importance of diversity in plantings?
Great, Kristen. Thanks for that question. At the present time, we are focused on the native maple for the reasons for the founders' interest in this. However, when we're doing our education and outreach, the message of native trees, shrubs, plants is obviously something we speak to often. because it's not just native maples that we need to be concerned about. And the issue of horticultural nurseries growing non-natives and marketing only those, often invasives, applies to plants and other trees as well. We try to be broad on our message when we have an opportunity, but our mandate currently is focused on native maples.
Okay, thanks, Deb. And there's one more question as well here. Will MLF support maple trees landowners could relocate from their own woodlots and plant on their property, similar to the original program in the early 1900s?
Interesting suggestion, Mark. I will certainly bring that back to Ken in my monthly discussions with him. So unless Ken wants to jump in right now.
I believe Ken is online, but I don't know see if he wants to unmute his microphone. Yeah, we'll give him a minute. In the meantime, there was one comment that Melissa mentioned might be good asking again. So this was just a general question. Can anyone here provide links to LED replacements for HPS bulbs without changing the fixture ballast? And that would provide correct wavelengths for seedling growth. So they're not interested in or trust information from small-scale gardeners or cannabis suppliers, and would prefer to hear firsthand success stories if anyone has any. So I guess that's just more of a general question for any of the speakers. And I think that's it for questions. So Rob, I guess over to you.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, so we're just gonna obviously close up now. You know, it's been a fantastic day. It's been so much fun to hear from all of you and to have so much representation from around the world attending at today's session. And special thanks to the CIF for all your work in the background of making all this happen. It was really a lot of work behind the scenes, and certainly, as we noted right at the very beginning, in relatively short order. A few of the comments too, and I just, you know, we talked about seed. I know there's a couple of questions about the cost of seed that was presented. And I know there's some, you know, in talking with folks right across Canada, there are definitely some Cadillac versions of seed collection systems and management systems out there. And then there's others that aren't quite so advanced. And I know that when you look at, you know, when we talk about seed, and it's so critical that we ensure that we have the right seed available, seed zone, and all the tracking that goes with it. You know, it really, you folks all know how important it is. But it's so important for us to get that message to the influencers out there and to the folks that can help support this long term, to ensure that those proper resources are there to make sure that we do have this right seed available, for the work with the nurseries to make sure that the appropriate stock can be developed from that right seed. And it's all about investment. And certainly when we hear about the seed orchards and how many years it takes to get a seed orchard producing seed, it's incredible, you know, the amount of effort and brilliance that goes behind it. As Melissa said a few times, you know, we've had the brain trust of seed people here on this call today, and there's so many people out there that are so brilliant with this. But we need to make sure that we're influencing those that are going to be able to commit to those long-term resources, and certainly, you know, back to some of the seed collection processes in Ontario that I'm more familiar with. You know, we've got folks that, you know, they collect seed. They're not making a living at it. They work hard. They're dedicated to it, and we need to make sure that people are getting properly compensated for this kind of work. And I know there's a lot of push on for seed orchards and stuff, but still the wild seed that is called, we've got a lot of very dedicated people in Ontario that do this work. And you know, again, they're not retiring on what they're making for this stuff. So anyway, all to the point of making sure that we've got the long-term resources in place to ensure that we're going to be able to get restore our forests, you know, both at the forest industry level, you know, make sure those resources, but certainly as we look forward to restoring the forest, as was identified as, you know, the areas that have been burned. And we're certainly looking at more area being, you know, potentially a significant year coming up too. So we can't just walk away from this. We have to make sure we dedicate the appropriate resources to get back in and restore these forests to what levels we can. So with that, I'm going to just flip it over to Melissa. Melissa, do you got any closing brilliant comments to make?
All the brilliant stuff was said. Yeah, no, again, thank you to everyone, and I'm very pleased with on short notice getting everyone together. I think it just speaks absolutely to the fact that we've kind of had a, you know, it's great after COVID that we really wanted to return to in-person meetings, but I really have always pushed, and Dave and I counterbalance each other on this, that, you know, I value the in-person stuff and riding on a bus with someone and taking these tours, but at times just to save some carbon for the trees and get us all together from really far-flung places, this is the way to do it. And I'm a big proponent of pushing virtual to interspersed where we can. So yeah, there will be a post-event survey, and it will really help us, but it'll also be great right now if you're thinking of it, or later, or there's an open text box at the end of the post webinar survey, is to tell us the kind of best times of years for everyone, because you know, from my end, trying to do things with the Tree Seed Center, trying to plan seasonal collection activities all over the country, trying to organize conferences, it helps to know when you guys are most available. I kind of generally know the seasonal activities of growers, and it's going to be very busy soon, and Seed Center folks have a slightly different schedule, but it's super helpful to know when that might be. And yeah, this was such a resounding success. We get a few great comments. We'll definitely be able to push forward and do it more regularly. Rob and I've talked quite a bit about, you know, what we can do next, and next summer's CFGA conference in Ontario hopefully will be a great opportunity to get a bunch more of us together in person. And yeah, suggest other speakers. Please contribute to the Tree Seed Working Group. If you got events or just, you know, any little article, piece of news, things that are interesting. It's very much not a highly, you know, we have a light editorial hand, we say, but you know, we do want to hear from different folks, because the turnover and the time that I've gotten involved in seed and interested in seed, it's just been absolutely astounding how many people have retired. And we're already a small, you know, niche group of experts, like so many things are in biological sciences, but we can't afford to have people, you know, just retire and not pass along their knowledge, not share, kind of, again, like Dave said, their failures. Like, we learn more from sometimes failing together, because we've all failed together, probably on the same thing. And if you're willing to share that, then you'll find lots of other people in the group that do. So yeah, I just want to reiterate that I was pretty proud of today. So I'm proud of everyone for attending, and yeah, we'll keep spreading the seed around and getting a few more people in our bag. So